will be are forms of time that have come to be. Such notions we unthinkingly but incorrectly apply to everlasting being. For we say that it was and is and will be, but according to the true account only is appropriately said of it. Was and will be are properly said about the becoming that passes in time, for these two are motions. But that which is always changeless and motionless cannot become either older or younger in the course of time. It neither ever became so, nor is it now such that it has become so, nor will it ever be so in the future. And all in all, none of the characteristics that becoming has bestowed upon the things that are born about in the realm of perception are appropriate to it. These, rather, are forms of time that have come to be, time that imitates eternity and circles according to number. And what is more, we also say things like these, that what has come to be is what has come to be, that what is coming to be is what is coming to be, and also that what will come to be is what will come to be, and that what is not is what is not. None of these expressions of ours is accurate, but I don't suppose this is a good time right now to be too meticulous about these matters. Time then came to be together with the universe, so that as they were begotten together, they might also be undone together, should there ever be an undoing of them. And it came to be after the model of that which is sempiternal, so that it might be as such like its model as possible. For the model is something that has being for all eternity, why it, on the other hand, has been, is, and shall be for all time for evermore. Such was the reason, then, such the God's design for the coming to be of time, that he brought into being the sun, the moon, and 5 other stars for the begetting of time. These are called wanderers, and they came to be in order to set limits to and stand guard over the numbers of time. When the God had finished making a body for each of them, he placed them into the orbits traced by the period of the different 7 bodies in 7 orbits. He set the moon in the first circle around the earth, and the sun in the second above it. The dawn-bearer, the morning star or Venus, and the star said to be sacred to Hermes, Mercury, he set to run in circles that equal the sun's in speed, though they received the power contrary to its power. As a result, the sun, the star of Hermes, and the dawn-bearer alike overtake and are overtaken by one another. As for the other bodies, if I were to spell out where he situated them, and all his reasons for doing so, my account, already a digression, would make more work than its purpose calls for. Perhaps later on we could, at our leisure, give this subject the exposition it deserves. Now, when each of the bodies that were to cooperate in producing time had come into the movement prepared for carrying it, and when, bound by bonds of soul, these bodies had been begotten with life and learned their assigned tasks, they began to revolve along the movement of the different, which is oblique and which goes through the movement of the same, by which it is also dominated. Some bodies would move in a larger circle, others in a smaller one, the latter moving more quickly and the former more slowly. Indeed, because of the movement of the same, the ones that go around most quickly appeared to be overtaken by those going more slowly, even though in fact they were overtaking them. For as it revolves, this movement gives to all these circles a spiral twist, because they are moving forward in 2 contrary directions at once. As a result, it makes that body which departs most slowly from it, and it is the fastest of the movements, appear closest to it. And so that there might be a conspicuous measure of their relative slowness and quickness with which they move along in their 8 revolutions, the God kindled a light in the orbit second from the earth, the light that we now call the sun. Its chief work would be to shine upon the whole universe, and to bestow upon all those living things appropriately endowed and taught by the revolution of the same and the uniform a share in number. In this way, and for these reasons, night and day, the period of a single circling, the wisest one, came to be. A month had passed, when the moon has completed its own cycle and overtaken the sun, a year when the sun has completed its own cycle. As for the periods of the other bodies, all but a scattered few have failed to take any note of them. Nobody has given them names or investigated their numerical measurements relative to each other, and so people are all but ignorant of the fact that time really is the wanderings of these bodies, bewilderingly numerous as they are and astonishingly variegated. It is none the less possible, however, to discern that the perfect number of time brings to completion the perfect year at that moment when the relative speeds of all 8 periods have been completed together and, measured by the circle of the same that moves uniformly, have achieved their consummation. This, then, is how as well as why those stars were begotten which, on their way through the universe, would have turnings. The purpose was to make this living thing as like as possible to that perfect and intelligible living thing by way of imitating its sempiternity. Prior to the coming to be of time, the universe had already been made to resemble in various aspects the model in whose likeness the god was making it, but the resemblance still fell short in that it didn't yet contain all the living things that were to have come to be within it. This remaining task he went on to perform, casting the whole world into the nature of its model. And so he determined that the living thing he was making should possess the same kinds and numbers of living things as those which, according to the discernment of intellect, are contained within the real living thing. Now, there are 4 of these kinds. First, the heavenly race of gods. Next, the kind that has wings and travels through the air. Third, the kind that lives in water. And fourth, the kind that has feet and lives on land. The gods he made mostly out of fire, to be the brightest and fairest to the eye. He made them well-rounded to resemble the universe, and placed them in the wisdom of the dominant circle, i.e. of the same, to follow the course of the universe. He spread the gods throughout the whole heaven to be a true adornment for it, an intricately wrought whole. And he bestowed 2 movements upon each of them. The first was rotation, an unvarying movement in the same place, by which the god would always think the same thoughts about the same things. The other was revolution, a forward motion under the dominance of the circular carrying movement of the same and uniform. With respect to the other 5 motions, the gods are immobile and stationary, in order that each of them may come as close as possible to attaining perfection. This, then, was the reason why all those everlasting and unwandering stars, divine living things which stay fixed by revolving without variation in the same place, came to be. Those that have turnings and thus wander in that sort of way came to be as previously described. The earth he devised to be our nurturer, and because it winds around the axis that stretches throughout the universe, also to be the maker and guardian of day and night. Of the gods that have come to be within the universe, earth ranks as the foremost, the one with greatest seniority. To describe the dancing movements of these gods, their juxtapositions, and the back-circlings and advances of their circular courses on themselves, to tell which of the gods come into line with one another at their conjunctions, and how many of them are in opposition, and in what order, and at which times they pass in front of or behind one another, so that some are occluded from our view to reappear once again, thereby bringing terrors and portents of things to come to those who cannot reason. To tell all this without the use of visible models would be labour spent in vain. We will make do with this account, and so let this be the conclusion of our discussion of the nature of the visible and generated gods. As for the other spiritual beings, daimons, it is beyond our task to know and speak of how they came to be. We should accept on faith the assertions of those figures of the past who claimed to be the offspring of gods. They must surely have been well informed about their own ancestors, so we cannot avoid believing the children of gods, even though their accounts lack plausible or compelling proofs. Rather, we should follow custom and believe them, on the ground that what they claim to be reporting are matters of their own concern. Accordingly, let us accept their account of how these gods came to be, and state what it is. Earth and heaven gave birth to Ocean and Tethys, who in turn gave birth to Phorcys, Cronus and Rhea and all the gods in that generation. Cronus and Rhea gave birth to Zeus and Hera, as well as all those siblings who are called by names we know. These in turn gave birth to yet another generation. In any case, when all the gods had come to be, both the ones who make their rounds conspicuously and the ones who present themselves only to the extent that they are willing, the begetter of this universe spoke to them. This is what he said: O gods, works divine, whose maker and father I am, whatever has come to be by my hands cannot be undone but by my consent. Now, while it is true that anything that is bound is liable to be undone, still, only one who is evil would consent to the undoing of what has been well fitted together, and is in fine condition. This is the reason why you, as creatures that have come to be, are neither completely immortal nor exempt from being undone. Still, you will not be undone, nor will death be your portion, since you have received the guarantee of my will, a greater, more sovereign bond than those with which you were bound when you came to be. Learn now, therefore, what I declare to you. There remain still 3 kinds of mortal beings that have not yet been begotten, and as long as they have not come to be, the universe will be incomplete, for it will still lack within it all the kinds of living things it must have if it is to be sufficiently complete. But if these creatures came to be and came to share in life by my hand, they would rival the gods. It is you, then, who must turn yourselves to the task of fashioning these living things as your nature allows. This will assure their mortality, and this whole universe will really be a completed whole. Imitate the power I use in causing you to be, and to the extent that it is fitting for them to possess something that shares our name of immortal, something described as divine and ruling within those of them who always consent to follow after justice and after you, I shall begin by sowing that seed and then hand it over to you. The rest of the task is yours. Weave what is mortal to what is immortal, fashion and beget living things, give them food, cause them to grow, and when they perish, receive them back again. When he had finished this speech, he turned again to the mixing bowl he had used before, the one in which he had blended and mixed the soul of the universe. He began to pour into it what remained of the previous ingredients, and to mix them in somewhat the same way, though these were no longer invariably and constantly pure, but of a second and third grade of purity. And when he had compounded it all, he divided the mixture into a number of souls equal to the number of stars, and assigned each soul to a star. He mounted each soul in a carriage, as it were, and showed it the nature of the universe. He described to them the laws that had been foreordained. They would all be assigned one and the same initial birth, so that none would be less well treated by him than any other. Then he would sow each of the souls into that instrument of time suitable to it, where they were to acquire the nature of being, the most God-fearing of living things, and, since humans have a twofold nature, the superior kind should be such as would from then on be called man. So once the souls were of necessity implanted in bodies, and these bodies had things coming to them and leaving them, the first innate capacity they would of necessity come to have would be sense perception, which arises out of forceful disturbances. This they all would have. The second would be love, mingled with pleasure and pain, and they would come to have fear and spiritedness as well, plus whatever goes with having these emotions, as well as all their natural opposites. And if they could master these emotions, their lives would be just, whereas if they were mastered by them, they would be unjust. And if a person lived a good life throughout the due course of his time, he would at the end return to his dwelling place in his companion star to live a life of happiness that agreed with his character. But if he failed in this, he would be born a second time, now as a woman, and if even then he still could not refrain from wickedness, he would be changed once again, this time into some wild animal that resembled the wicked character he had acquired. And he would have no rest from these toilsome transformations until he had dragged that massive accretion of fire, water, air, earth into conformity with the revolution of the same and uniform within him, and so subdued that turbulent, irrational mass by means of reason. This would return him to his original condition of excellence. Having set out all these ordinances to them, which he did to exempt himself from responsibility for any evil they might afterwards do, The god proceeded to sow some of them into the earth, some into the moon, and others into the various other instruments of time. After the sowing, he handed over to the young gods the task of weaving mortal bodies. He had them make whatever else remained that the human soul still needed to have, plus whatever goes with those things. He gave them the task of ruling over these mortal living things and giving them the finest, the best possible guidance they could give, without being responsible for any evils these creatures might bring upon themselves. When he had finished assigning all these tasks, he proceeded to abide at rest in his own customary nature. His children immediately began to attend to and obey their father's assignment. Now that they had received the immortal principle of the mortal living thing, they began to imitate the craftsman who had made them. They borrowed parts of fire, earth, water, and air from the world, intending to pay them back again, and bonded together into a unity the parts they had taken, but not with those indissoluble bonds by which they themselves were held together. Instead, they proceeded to fuse them together with copious rivets so small as to be invisible, thereby making each body a unit made up of all the components. And they went on to invest this body, into and out of which things were to flow, with the orbits of the immortal soul. These orbits, now bound within a mighty river, neither mastered that river, nor were mastered by it, but tossed it violently, and were violently tossed by it. Consequently, the living thing as a whole did indeed move, but it would proceed in a disorderly, random, and irrational way that involved all 6 of the motions. It would go forwards and backwards, then back and forth, to the right and the left, and upwards and downwards, wandering every which way in these 6 directions. For mighty as the nourishment-bearing billow was in its ebb and flow, mightier still was the turbulence produced by the disturbances caused by the things that struck against the living things. Such disturbances would occur when the body encountered and collided with external fire, i.e., fire other than the body's own, or for that matter with a hard lump of earth, or with the flow of gliding waters, or when it was caught up by a surge of air-driven winds. The motions produced by all these encounters would then be conducted through the body to the soul and strike against it. That is no doubt why these motions as a group came afterwards to be called sensations, as they are still called today. It was just then, at that very instant, that they produced a very long and intense commotion. They cooperated with the continually flowing channel to stir and violently shake the orbits of the soul. They completely bound that of the same by flowing against it in the opposite direction, and held it fast just as it was beginning to go its way. And they further shook the orbit of the different right through, with the result that they twisted every which way the 3 intervals of the double and the 3 of the triple, as well as the middle terms of the ratios of 3-2, 4-3, and 9-8 that connect them. These agitations did not undo them, however, because they cannot be completely undone except by the one who had bound them together. They mutilated and disfigured the circles in every possible way, so that the circles barely held together, and though they remained in motion, they moved without rhyme or reason, sometimes in the opposite direction, sometimes sideways, and sometimes upside down, like a man upside down, head propped against the ground and holding his feet up against something. In that position his right side will present itself both to him and to those looking at him as left, and his left side as right. It is this very thing, and others like it, that had such a dramatic effect upon the revolutions of the soul. Whenever they encounter something outside of them characterizable as same or different, they will speak of it as the same as something, or as different from something else, when the truth is just the opposite, so proving themselves to be misled and unintelligent. Also, at this stage, souls do not have a ruling orbit taking the lead, and so when certain sensations come in from outside and attack them, they sweep the soul's entire vessel along with them. It is then that these revolutions, however much in control they seem to be, are actually under their control. All these disturbances are no doubt the reason why even today, and not only at the beginning, whenever a soul is bound within a mortal body, it at first lacks intelligence. But as the stream that brings growth and nourishment diminishes, and the soul's orbit regain their composure, resume their proper courses, and establish themselves more and more with the passage of time, their revolutions are set straight to conform to the configuration each of the circles takes in its natural course. They then correctly identify what is the same and what is different, and render intelligent the person who possesses them. And to be sure, if such a person also gets proper nurture to supplement his education, he'll turn out perfectly whole and healthy, and will have escaped the most grievous of illnesses. But if he neglects this, he'll limp his way through life and return to Hades uninitiated and unintelligent. But this doesn't happen until later. Our present subject, on the other hand, needs a more detailed treatment. We must move on to treat the prior questions, the ones that deal with how bodies came to be, part by part, as well as the soul. What were the gods' reasons? What was their plan when they caused these to be? In discussing these questions, we shall hold fast to what is most likely, and proceed accordingly. Copying the revolving shape of the universe, the gods bound the two divine orbits into a ball-shaped body, the part that we now call our head. This is the most divine part of us, and master of all our other parts. They then assembled the rest of the body, and handed the whole of it to the head to be in its service. They intended it to share in all the motions there were to be. To keep the head from rolling around on the ground without any way of getting up over its various high spots and out of the low, they gave it the body as a vehicle to make its way easy. This is the reason why the body came to have length and grow 4 limbs that could flex and extend themselves, divinely devised for the purpose of getting about. Holding on and supporting itself with these limbs, it would be capable of making its way through all regions, while carrying at the top the dwelling place of that most divine, most sacred part of ourselves. This is how, as well as why, we have all grown arms and legs. And considering the front side to be more honourable and more commanding than the back, the gods gave us the ability to travel for the most part in this direction. Human beings, no doubt, ought to have the front sides of their bodies distinguishable from and dissimilar to their backs, and so the gods began by setting the face on that side of the head, the soul's vessel. They bound organs inside it to provide completely for the soul, and they assigned this side, the natural front, to be the part that takes the lead. The eyes were the first of the organs to be fashioned by the gods to conduct light. The reason why they fastened them within the head is this. They contrived that such fire as was not for burning, but for providing a gentle light, should become a body proper to each day. Now the pure fire inside us, cousin to that fire, they made to flow through the eyes. So they made the eyes, the eye as a whole, but its middle in particular, close-textured, smooth and dense, to enable them to keep out all the other coarser stuff, and let that kind of fire pass through pure by itself. Now, whenever daylight surrounds the visual stream, like makes contact with like, and coalesces with it, to make up a single homogeneous body aligned with the direction of the eyes. This happens wherever the internal fire strikes and presses against an external object it has connected with, and because this body of fire has become uniform throughout and thus uniformly affected, it transmits the motions of whatever it comes in contact with, as well as of whatever comes in contact with it, to and through the whole body until they reach the soul. This brings about the sensation we call seeing. At night, however, the kindred fire has departed, and so the visual stream is cut off, for now it exists only to encounter something unlike itself. No longer able to bond with the surrounding air, which now has lost its fire, it undergoes change and dies out. So it not only stops seeing, but even begins to induce sleep. For when the eyelids which the gods devised to keep eyesight safe are closed, they shut in the power of the internal fire, which then disperses and evens out the internal motions, and when these have been evened out, a state of quietness ensues. And if this quietness is deep, one falls into an all but dreamless sleep. But if some fairly strong motions remain, they produce images similar in kind and in number to the kind of motions they are, and the kind of regions in which they remain, images which, though formed within, are recalled upon waking as external objects. And so there is no longer any difficulty in understanding how images are produced in mirrors or in any other smooth reflecting surfaces. On such occasions the internal fire joins forces with the external fire to form on the smooth surface a single fire which is reshaped in a multitude of ways. So once the fire from the face comes to coalesce with the fire from sight on the smooth and bright surface, you have the inevitable appearance of all images of this sort. What is left will appear as right, because the parts of the fire from sight connect with the opposite parts of the fire from the face contrary to the usual manner of encounter. But, on the other hand, what is right does appear as right, and what is left as left, whenever light switches sides in the process of coalescing with the light with which it coalesces. And this happens whenever the mirror's smooth surface is curled upwards on both sides, thereby bending the right part of the fire from sight towards the left, and the left part towards the right. And when this same smooth surface is turned along the length of the face, i.e., vertically, it makes the whole object appear upside down, because it bends the lower part of the ray toward the top, and the upper part towards the bottom. Now, all of the above are among the auxiliary causes employed in the service of the god, as he does his utmost to bring to completion the character of what is most excellent. But because they make things cold or hot, compact or disperse them, and produce all sorts of similar effects, most people regard them not as auxiliary causes, but as the actual causes of all things. Things like these, however, are totally incapable of possessing any reason or understanding about anything. We must pronounce the soul to be the only thing there is that properly possesses understanding. The soul is an invisible thing, whereas fire, water, earth, and air all have come to be as visible bodies. So anyone who is a lover of understanding and knowledge must of necessity pursue as primary causes those that belong to intelligent nature, and as secondary all those belonging to things that are moved by others and that set still others in motion by necessity. We too, surely, must do likewise. We must describe both types of causes, distinguishing those which possess understanding and thus fashion what is beautiful and good, from those which, when deserted by intelligence, produce only haphazard and disorderly effects every time. Let us conclude, then, our discussion of the accompanying auxiliary causes that gave our eyes the power which they now possess. We must next speak of that supremely beneficial function for which the god gave them to us. As my account has it, our sight has indeed proved to be a source of supreme benefit to us, in that none of our present statements about the universe could ever have been made if we had never seen any stars, sun, or heaven. As it is, however, our ability to see the periods of day and night, of months and years, of equinoxes and solstices, has led to the invention of number, and has given us the idea of time, and opened the path to inquiry into the nature of the universe. These pursuits have given us philosophy, a gift from the gods to the mortal race whose value neither has been nor ever will be surpassed. I am quite prepared to declare this to be the supreme good our eyesight offers us. Why, then, should we exalt all the lesser good things, which a non-philosopher struck blind would lament and bewail in vain? Let us rather declare that the cause and purpose of this supreme good is this. The god invented sight and gave it to us, so that we might observe the orbits of intelligence in the universe, and apply them to the revolutions of our own understanding. For there is a kinship between them, even though our revolutions are disturbed, whereas the universal orbits are undisturbed. So once we have come to know them, and to share in the ability to make correct calculations according to nature, we should stabilize the straying revolutions within ourselves by imitating the completely unstraying revolutions of the god. Likewise, the same account goes for sound and hearing. These too are the god's gift, given for the same purpose and intended to achieve the same result. Speech was designed for this very purpose. It plays the greatest part in its achievement. and all such composition as lends itself to make an audible musical sound is given in order to express harmony, and so serves this purpose as well. And harmony, whose movements are akin to the orbits within our souls, is a gift of the Muses, if our dealings with them are guided by understanding, not for irrational pleasure, for which people nowadays seem to make use of it, but to serve as an ally in the fight to bring order to any orbit in our souls that has become unharmonized, and make it concordant with itself. Rhythm, too, has likewise been given us by the Muses for the same purpose, to assist us. For with most of us our condition is such that we have lost all sense of measure, and are lacking in grace. Now, in all but a brief part of the discourse I have just completed, I have presented what has been crafted by intellect, but I need to match this account by providing a comparable one concerning the things that have come about by necessity. For this ordered world is of mixed birth. It is the offspring of a union of necessity and intellect. Intellect prevailed over necessity by persuading it to direct most of the things that come to be towards what is best, and the result of this subjugation of necessity to wise persuasion was the initial formation of this universe. So, if I'm to tell the story of how it really came to be in this way, I'd also have to introduce the character of the straying cause, how it is its nature to set things adrift. I shall have to retrace my steps then, and, armed with a second starting point that also applies to these same things, I must go back once again to the beginning and start my present inquiry from there, just as I did with my earlier one. We shall of course have to study the intrinsic nature of fire, water, air, and earth prior to the heavens coming to be, as well as the properties they had then. So far, no one has as yet revealed how these four came to be. We tend to posit them as the elemental letters of the universe and tell people they are its principles on the assumption that they know what fire and the other three are. In fact, however, they shouldn't even be compared to syllables. Only a very unenlightened person might be expected to make such a comparison. So let me now proceed with my treatment in the following way. For the present I cannot state the principle or principles of all things, or however else I think about them, for the simple reason that it is difficult to show clearly what my view is if I follow my present manner of exposition. Please do not expect me to do so, then. I couldn't convince even myself that I could be right to commit myself to undertaking a task of such magnitude. I shall keep to what I stated at the beginning, the virtue of likely accounts, and so shall try right from the start to say about things both individually and collectively what is no less likely than any, more likely in fact, than what I have said before. Let us therefore at the outset of this discourse call upon the God to be our Saviour this time too, to give us safe passage through a strange and unusual exposition, and lead us to a view of what is likely, and so let me begin my speech again. The new starting point in my account of the universe needs to be more complex than the earlier one. Then we distinguished two kinds, but now we must specify a third, one of a different sort. The earlier two sufficed for our previous account. One was proposed as a model, intelligible and always changeless. A second was an imitation of the model, something that possesses becoming and is visible. We did not distinguish a third kind at the time, because we thought that we could make do with the two of them. Now, however, it appears that our account compels us to attempt to illuminate in words a kind that is difficult and vague. What must we suppose it to do and to be? This, above all, it is a receptacle of all becoming, its wet nurse, as it were. However true that statement may be, we must nevertheless describe it more clearly. This is a difficult task, particularly because it requires us to raise a preliminary problem about fire and the other three. It is difficult to say of each of them, in a way that employs a reliable and stable account, which one is the sort of thing one should really call water rather than fire, or which one should call some one of these rather than just any and every one of them. What problem, then, do they present for us to work through in likely fashion? And then how and in what manner are we to go on to speak about this third kind. First, we see, or think we see, the thing that we have just now been calling water condensing and turning to stones and earth. Next, we see this same thing dissolving and dispersing, turn into wind and air, when ignited, turn into fire. And then we see fire being condensed and extinguished and turning back into the form of air, and air coalescing and thickening and turning back into cloud and mist. When these are compressed still more, we see them turning into flowing water, which we see turning to earth and stones once again. In this way, then, they transmit their coming to be one to the other in a cycle, or so it seems. Now then, since none of these appears ever to remain the same, which one of them can one categorically assert, without embarrassment, to be some particular thing, this one, and not something else? One can't. Rather, the safest course by far is to propose that we speak about these things in the following way. What we invariably observe becoming different at different times, fire, for example, to characterize that, i.e., fire not as this, but each time as what is such, and speak of water not as this, but always as what is such, and never to speak of anything else as this, as though it has some stability, of all the things at which we point, and use the expressions that and this, and so think we are designating something. For it gets away without abiding the charge of that and this, or any other expression that indicts them of being stable. It is, in fact, safest not to refer to it by any of these expressions. Rather, what is such, coming around like what it was, again and again, that's the thing to call it in each and every case. So fire, and generally everything that has becoming, it is safest to call what is altogether such. But that in which they each appear to keep coming into being, and from which they subsequently pass out of being, that's the only thing to refer to by means of the expressions that and this. A thing that is some such or other, however, hot or white, say, or any one of the opposites, and all things constituted by these, should be called none of these things, i.e., this or that. I must make one more effort to describe it, more clearly still. Suppose you were moulding gold into every shape there is, going on non-stop remoulding one shape into the next. If someone then were to point at one of them and ask you, "What is it?" your safest answer by far, with respect to truth, would be to say gold, but never triangle, or any of the other shapes that come to be in the gold, as though it is these, because they change even while you're making the statement. However, that answer too should be satisfactory, as long as the shapes are willing to accept what is such as someone's designation. This has a degree of safety. Now the same account, in fact, holds also for that nature which receives all the bodies. We must always refer to it by the same term, for it does not depart from its own character in any way. Not only does it always receive all things, it has never in any way whatever taken on any characteristic similar to any of the things that enter it. Its nature is to be available for anything to make its impression upon, and it is modified, shaped, and reshaped by the things that enter it. These are the things that make it appear different at different times. The things that enter and leave it are imitations of those things that always are, imprinted after their likeness in a marvellous way that is hard to describe. This is something we shall pursue at another time. For the moment, we need to keep in mind three types of things: that which comes to be, that in which it comes to be, and that after which the thing coming to be is modelled, and which is the source of its coming to be. It is in fact appropriate to compare the receiving thing to a mother, the source to a father, and the nature between them to their offspring. We also must understand that if the imprints are to be varied, with all the varieties there to see, this thing upon which the imprints are to be formed could not be well prepared for that role if it were not itself devoid of any of those characters that it is to receive from elsewhere. For if it resembled any of the things that enter it, it could not successfully copy their opposites or things of a totally different nature whenever it were to receive them. It would be showing its own face as well. This is why the thing that is to receive in itself all the elemental kinds must be totally devoid of any characteristics. Think of people who make fragrant ointments. They expend skill and ingenuity to come up with something just like this, i.e. a neutral base, to have on hand to start with. The liquids that are to receive the fragrances they make as odorless as possible. Or think of people who work at impressing shapes upon soft materials. They emphatically refuse to allow any such material to already have some definite shape. Instead, they'll even it out and make it as smooth as it can be. In the same way, then, if the thing that is to receive repeatedly throughout its whole self the likeness of the intelligible objects, the things which always are, if it is to do so successfully, then it ought to be devoid of any inherent characteristics of its own. This, of course, is the reason why we shouldn't call the mother or receptacle of what has come to be, of what is visible or perceivable in any other way, either earth or air, fire or water, or any of their compounds or their constituents. But if we speak of it as an invisible and characterless sort of thing, one that receives all things and shares in a most perplexing way in what is intelligible, a thing extremely difficult to comprehend, we shall not be misled. And in so far as it is possible to arrive at its nature on the basis of what we've said so far, the most correct way to speak of it may well be this. The part of it that gets ignited appears on each occasion as fire, the dampened part as water, and parts as earth or air in so far as it receives the imitations of these. But we must prefer to conduct our inquiry by means of rational argument. Hence we should make a distinction like the following. Is there such a thing as fire by itself? Do all these things of which we always say that each of them is something by itself really exist? Or are the things we see and whatever else we perceive through the body the only things that possess this kind of actuality, so that there is absolutely nothing else besides them at all? Is our perpetual claim that there exists an intelligible form for each thing a vacuous gesture, in the end nothing but mere talk? Now we certainly will not do justice to the question before us if we dismiss it, leaving it undecided and unadjudicated, and just insist that such things exist, but neither must we append a further lengthy digression to a discourse already quite long. If, however, a significant distinction formulated in few words were to present itself, that would suit our present needs best of all. So here's how I cast my own vote. If understanding and true opinion are distinct, then these, by themselves, things definitely exist, these forms, the objects not of our sense perception, but of our understanding only. But if, as some people think, true opinion does not differ in any way from understanding, then all the things we perceive through our bodily senses must be assumed to be the most stable things there are. But we do have to speak of understanding and true opinion as distinct, of course, because we can come to have one without the other, and the one is not like the other. It is through instruction that we come to have understanding, and through persuasion that we come to have true belief. Understanding always involves a true account, while true belief lacks any account. And while understanding remains unmoved by persuasion, true belief gives in to persuasion. And of true belief it must be said, all men have a share, but of understanding only the gods and a small group of people do. Since these things are so, we must agree that that which keeps its own form unchangingly, which has not been brought into being, and is not destroyed, which neither receives into itself anything else from anywhere else, nor itself enters into anything else anywhere, is one thing. It is invisible. It cannot be perceived by the senses at all, and it is the role of understanding to study it. The second thing is that which shares the other's name and resembles it. This thing can be perceived by the senses, and it has been begotten. It is constantly borne along, now coming to be in a certain place, and then perishing out of it. It is apprehended by opinion, which involves sense perception. And the third type is space, which exists always and cannot be destroyed. It provides a fixed state for all things that come to be. It is itself apprehended by a kind of bastard reasoning that does not involve sense perception, and it is hardly even an object of conviction. We look at it as in a dream, when we say that everything that exists must of necessity be somewhere, in some place and occupying some space, and that that which doesn't exist somewhere, whether on earth or in heaven, doesn't exist at all. We prove unable to draw all these distinctions and others related to them, even in the case of that unsleeping, truly existing reality, because our dreaming state rendered us incapable of waking up and stating the truth, which is this. Since that for which an image has come to be is not at all intrinsic to the image, which is invariably borne along to picture something else, it stands to reason that the image should therefore come to be in something else, somehow clinging to being, or else be nothing at all. But that which really is receives support from the accurate, true account, that as long as the one is distinct from the other, neither of them ever comes to be in the other in such a way that they at the same time become one and the same, and also two. Let this then be a summary of the account I would offer, as computed by my vote. There are being, space, and becoming, three distinct things which existed even before the universe came to be. Now, as the wet nurse of becoming turns watery and fiery, and receives the character of the earth and air, and as it acquires all of the properties that come with these characters, it takes on a variety of visible aspects, but because it is filled with powers that are neither similar nor evenly balanced, no part of it is in balance. It sways irregularly in every direction as it is shaken by those things, and being set in motion, it in turn shakes them. And as they are moved, they drift continually, some in one direction and others in others, separating from one another. They are winnowed out, as it were, like grain that is sifted by winnowing sieves or other such implements. They are carried off and settle down, the dense and heavy ones in one direction, and the rare and light ones to another place. That is how at that time the four kinds were being shaken by the receiver, which was itself agitating like a shaking machine, separating the kinds most unlike each other furthest apart, and pushing those most like each other closer together into the same region. This, of course, explains how these different kinds came to occupy different regions of space, even before the universe was set in order and constituted from them as its coming to be. Indeed, it is a fact that before this took place the four kinds all lacked proportion and measure, and at the time the ordering of the universe was undertaken, fire, water, earth, and air initially possessed certain traces of what they are now. They were indeed in the condition one would expect thoroughly God-forsaken things to be in. So, finding them in this natural condition, the first thing the God then did was to give them their distinctive shapes, using forms and numbers. Here is a proposition we shall always affirm above all else. The God fashioned these four kinds to be as perfect and excellent as possible when they were not so before. It would now be my task to explain to you what structure each of them acquired, and how each came to be. My account will be an unusual one, but since you are well schooled in the fields of learning in terms of which I must of necessity proceed with my exposition, I'm sure you'll follow me. First of all, everyone knows, I'm sure, that fire, earth, water, and air are bodies. Now everything that has bodily form also has depth. Depth, moreover, is of necessity comprehended within surface, and any surface bounded by straight lines is composed of triangles. Every triangle, moreover, derives from two triangles, each of which has one right angle and two acute angles. Of these two triangles, one, the isosceles right-angled triangle, has at each of the other two vertices an equal part of a right angle determined by its division by equal sides, while the other, the scalene right-angled triangle, has unequal parts of a right angle at its other two vertices, determined by the division of the right angle by unequal sides. This, then, we presume to be the originating principle of fire, and of the other bodies, as we pursue our likely account in terms of necessity. Principles yet more ultimate than these are known only to the God, and to any man he may hold dear. We should now say which are the most excellent four bodies that can come to be. They are quite unlike each other, though some of them are capable of breaking up and turning into others, and vice versa. If our account is on the mark, we shall have the truth about how earth and fire and their proportionate intermediates, water and air, came to be. For we shall never concede to anyone that there are any visible bodies more excellent than these, each conforming to a single kind. So we must wholeheartedly proceed to fit together the 4 kinds of bodies of surpassing excellence, and to declare that we have come to grasp their natures well enough. Of the 2 right-angled triangles, the isosceles has but one nature, while the scalene has infinitely many. Now we have to select the most excellent one from among the infinitely many, if we are to get a proper start. So if any one can say that he has picked out another one that is more excellent for the construction of these bodies, his victory will be that of a friend, not an enemy. Of the many scalene right-angled triangles, then, we posit as the one most excellent, surpassing the others, that one from, a pair of, which the equilateral triangle is constructed as a 3rd figure. Why this is so is too long a story to tell now, but if anyone puts this claim to the test and discovers that it isn't so, his be the prize, with our congratulations. So much then for the selection of the 2 triangles out of which the bodies of fire and the other bodies are constructed, the right-angled isosceles and the right-angled scalene, whose longer side squared is always triple its shorter side squared, i.e., the half equilateral. At this point we need to formulate more precisely something that was not stated clearly earlier, for then it appeared that all 4 kinds of bodies could turn into one another by successive stages, but the appearance is wrong. While there are indeed 4 kinds